Well, you just heard it. When the Son of Man comes in his glory with all his angels, he will take the nations and he will separate them like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will say to those sheep, "Blessed are you, enter into the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, because when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. When I was naked, you gave me clothing. When I was sick, you took care of me. And when I was in prison, you visited me." And the sheep will look at the Son of Man and they'll say, "Master, when did we ever see you hungry and give you food, or thirsty and give you drink? Or when were you a stranger and we welcomed you? Or when were you naked and we gave you clothing? Or sick and took care of you? When were you ever in prison and we visited you?" And the Son of Man will say, "When you've done it for the least of these, you have done it for me." Then he's going to go to the goats. We're getting a little nervous at this point. He's going to say, "You into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and all his angels, because when I was hungry, you did not give me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you did not give me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you did not welcome me. When I was naked, you did not give me clothing. When I was sick, you did not take care of me. And when I was in prison, you did not visit." And the ghosts will say, "Master, when did we ever see you like that and not do right by you?" And the Son of Man will say, "When you did not do it for the least of all, you did not do it for me." You know, sheep and goats, they're really very similar, closely related, herd animals. Goats are actually much more entertaining and clever. Being that this is a story about animals that are so similar and that people can be so similar, what are we to make of it? Well, let's look at a few things. While this story might be referencing that's going to happen on that day, it's first and foremost a parable. It's one of those wonderful, brilliant stories that Jesus told. And when Jesus told a parable, we're supposed to see ourselves in it. For example, prodigal son, right? When I was younger and I was being a little bit rebellious and maybe misbehaving, enjoying myself, misbehaving, I could see myself as the prodigal. And then I got a little older, and as I got older, I started to relate more to that son who stayed behind. You know, the one who stayed there, was faithful, did all the work, didn't really ever get a party. And now that I'm still older, yeah, I relate to Dad. But when we put ourselves into this parable, well, we realize sometimes we help people. We try to help people. We try to do it a lot, but we don't help all of them. Sometimes we're sheep. Sometimes we're goats. We're the Shoats. Yep. That's us, Shoats. And for a lot of reasons, there aren't any Shoats in Jesus' story. Jesus leaves out the in-between because it would muddy his point. Next, this story is something that's really about the nation. You have to remember that salvation as an individual concept is a fairly late development in the faith. If you look at the Old Testament, salvation, even when someone is crying out for salvation, is always directed to the nation of Israel. That's the ultimate goal of salvation, that Israel will be saved. Even in the early church, there wasn't this big divide between the Jews and the early Christians. The early Christians were very happy in the temple. They liked being there. They liked preaching and teaching in the temple. They saw themselves as Jews. The only difference was they had a Messiah who had come, who had died, and who had risen again. They were so Jewish that it caused a big hullabaloo, if you remember, when Paul and Silas started preaching to the Gentiles, and all of a sudden the Gentiles started wanting to become Christians, and it was a serious question. Could these people, who are so different from us, who are not circumcised, be part of our family? And of course, the Christians eventually got kicked out of the temple, and as more converts were won to the faith, this idea of individual salvation began to take more of a hold. But it wasn't really until Christianity became the faith of the Roman Empire that it became a rock-solid idea. And when that big bag of hammers called hell became so prevalent in Christian thought. And a lot of the reason for that, of course, was being the faith of the empire. Now Christianity had to keep people in line. The threat of hell does a pretty good job of that. As I've explained before, and by the way, I'm not arguing about the existence of hell today or not. We certainly have it on earth. If it's in another place, we'll find out eventually. But in Jewish thought, at the time of Jesus, hell was not like we think about it today. First of all, the Old Testament does not have the concept of hell. It's not there. Sheol is not hell. Sheol is the realm of the dead. And sometime we probably have to bite the bullet and in our creed change those words we say descended into hell to the other accepted translation descended to the dead, because that's actually more accurate. Sheol is the realm of the dead, not hell. And from what I can find about the time of Jesus concerning hell, Jews felt by that point that there was a place of correction. That if you were a real mess, you could go there. But this was not eternal. There was a time limit. You would go for a year, tops. And in the space of a year, God could educate you up, reform you, and then you'd be allowed to move on to the next step. When Jesus references hell, he's almost exclusively talking about the town dump, Gehenna. When you see hell in your New Testament, it's probably Gehenna. But they wrote hell. And the town dump was a stinky place. There were fires burning all the time. It was not pleasant to be there. And if you were there, you felt separated from all good things, including God. You know, as we listen to this story, it might also be helpful to realize there came a time when the disciples looked at all the things Jesus had been saying about how you had to be to enter the kingdom. And they realized nobody was going to get there. Jesus had just had an interaction with that rich guy, and he says how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich person to enter the kingdom. And the disciples throw their arms up in the air and they say, well, who's going to be saved then? And Jesus answers, with people it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. Okay, so we've got a story that talks more about nations than individuals, which makes us realize we do need to care about how our country acts. And that appears to be completely black and white. Sheeps, goats, no shoats. Okay? And it talks about a place where there's rejoicing and a place where there's weeping and the gnashing of teeth. And it's a story where I feel Jesus is using extremes. The practice of hyperbole, which was very accepted in that time, exaggeration, to make a very serious point. So what do we do with it? Well, we listen. And we try to do better. More than anything, this is a story that tells us how we treat people is how we treat God. One more time. How we treat people is how we treat God. You can have a fancy-schmancy theology. You can have the greatest conversion story ever told. You can be in the pew every single week, front row at all the special services. You can be on your knees every single night. But if you do not see Christ in your sister, if you do not see Christ in your brother, noisy gong, clanging cymbal. I don't think Jesus is expecting us to be perfect. The sheep in this parable, they're pretty perfect. Jesus understood us. Jesus understands us. Jesus knows we're fallen. That's why Jesus showed up. But the parable shows us how to live. How to live if we want to know the joy of living with and working with God in the here and now. And if we want to avoid that definition of hell, we probably all can agree on self-imposed separation from our God. See God in your neighbor. Let us do justice. Let us love mercy. And we will be walking humbly with our God.